The lesson today is Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 20, which can be found on page 50 in the Old Testament in the Pew Bibles if you wish to follow along. The passage begins with the familiar story of Moses and the burning bush and continues with God's call to Moses to lead his people out of Egypt. Listen to the word of the Lord. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." He said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He said, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." He said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this my title for all generations. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, "The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have given heed to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. I declare that I will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt, the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us now go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I know, however, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, and I will perform in it. After that he will let you go." The word of the Lord.
If you're interested in going with the group from the church, let Kate know so that she can reserve you a ticket. I personally love a good musical. My love for musicals goes back to my childhood when I got to see a lot of really good Broadway musicals. My Uncle David was counsel in New York City for Pan Am Airlines in the Pan Am building, and through his work, he got discount tickets to Broadway musicals and invited my family to attend. We were only a 2-hour drive away, so as a child, I saw Andrea McArdle play Annie, and I saw Sandy Duncan play Peter Pan, and Yul Brynner play the King in The King and I. We saw Cats in a chorus line when they first came out on Broadway. Some of my happiest memories from childhood are of these family trips to New York City to see these Broadway musicals. It was family time. It was joyful and adventurous. It enlivened the senses. It usually involved a really good story. It felt very special. It felt like holy time. I'm one of those people who likes to sing along with musicals. I do not do this in public. But when at home or in the car alone, there is nothing like belting out a good Broadway show tune. One musical I did not see as a child, but have seen since, is the movie version of Singin' in the Rain with Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds. There's a song in that musical entitled Moses Supposes. The story takes place when talkies or talking movies are just coming out and diction coaches are in high demand. Does anyone know this musical? I think a few people, yeah. Gene Kelly is getting a diction lesson in the movie so that he can learn how to pronounce words appropriately in these new talking films. And his lesson goes something like this: Moses supposes his roses, his toeses are roses. And then Gene Kelly starts to riff on it, and he goes, Moses supposes his toeses are roses, and Moses supposes erroneously. And it's a fun song in the musical. And it highlights the prophet Moses. The song itself doesn't have a whole lot to do with this story in Exodus, except for the fact that Moses is highlighted. Today we begin our summer sermon series on stories in the Bible with Moses. Thank you to those of you who suggested stories for our summer series. Some of the stories you'll hear this summer may be familiar, some may be more obscure. Some of the stories are taken directly from the lectionary readings, and some from what you all suggested. Today we will begin with one of the foundational stories from our faith, at the beginning of the canon in Exodus, with that prophet extraordinaire, Moses. And we will explore what it is Moses supposes. Many of us are familiar with segments or parts of the Moses story. Maybe we recall Moses and the bulrushes, or the Prince of Egypt version of the story, or Moses in the burning bush, or the plagues, or Moses leading the people out of Egypt through the Red Sea. We have the good fortune of being able to hear what's known as Moses' call story 2 weeks in a row here at Lewinsville. Last Sunday, we heard the same scripture passage that Mary just read to us as the folks coming back from the Summer Mission Project reflected on their work in Hartsville, South Carolina. Today, we hear Moses' call story again, and we will reflect on what Moses' call means for you and for me and for our church. Moses' credentials don't read as a likely candidate to receive a call from God. Who would choose an elderly, arrogant, temperamental ex-murderer as their leader? Moses is a far cry from our understanding of the ideal leader. Yet Moses is the one whom God chose to lead and guide and pastor the people. This passage from Exodus 3 is an example of a classical biblical call story. And as such, it follows a 4-part procedure. We'll call this God's procedure of call. First, there's a charge to complete a task. In this case, God says to Moses, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Second, there's resistance. Moses is resistant to this charge, and then some, because he poses a series of 5 objections, stating why he's not the right person to carry out this charge. Moses says he's unworthy for the task. And then he says he doesn't have enough information about God. Moses argues the people won't listen to him or won't believe him. And then Moses reiterates that he's incompetent, he's not eloquent. And finally, Moses just asks God to send someone else. He says, I can't do it. I don't want to do it. So there's some definite resistance put up by Moses to God's call. The third part of the call story is assurance. There's assurance that God offers. God says, I will be with you. And then finally, the fourth part is a sign to confirm God's assurance. God says, this will be a sign for you that it's I who sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So the 4-part procedure of Moses' call is a charge, resistance, assurance by God, and a sign to confirm. Several of the call stories in the Bible follow this 4-part procedure. God's procedure of calling someone is completely different from any procedure we might employ. Our procedures for finding a leader, for discerning a calling, will be different. We can't do anything about that. We are not God. What we can do is make sure we know what God means by call and leadership, so that we can set ourselves out to discern God's call for Lewinsville, for our individual lives. We do so with God's definitions at the center. As Pastor Will Willimon says, it is odd that God needs someone, particularly someone as inept as Moses, to do the work. One might think that being God means having the ability to work solo. It is odd of God to pick Moses, and Moses realizes this. Moses isn't just being humble when he lodges his 5 objections. He really doesn't have any of the skills required for liberating leadership. Willimon recognizes that it is strange God needs anyone at all, and stranger still that God calls people like Moses, people who seem all wrong. Willimon realizes that God's ideas of leadership, of call, are different from the ones we usually think of. Leadership begins in the mind of God as a gracious invitation, a gracious inclusion of humanity into the plan and purposes of God. God condescends lovingly to include you and me into God's purpose and plan for the world. God's choices of who God calls tell us more about the quality of God than about the positive qualities of the people who are called to lead. The people who are called to lead are almost always the wrong people if we were to do the choosing. It's almost as if God goes out of God's way to pick those who have the worst resume. Think of that liar and cheat Jacob. Think of the young, uncredentialed Mary. Think of that persecutor of Christians, Paul. And now Moses. The only skill set all of God's chosen leaders have in common is faith. Faith in God's promise when God says, I will be with you. The only thing we can be certain of when it comes to biblical leadership is that it begins with God's summons. This summons is God's call. In saying yes to the summons, we yield to God and are owned and commandeered for God, being used for purposes greater than ourselves. After the summons, after God's call, there's uncertainty. There's no certainty in how to lead or by what means. Looking at the examples of call and leadership in the Bible does, however, reveal this certainty. We are to persevere in faith and trust God is with us. Lutheran preaching professor David Luce puts it this way: Moses has learned who God is by trusting God. and following God on the path set for him, thereby learning firsthand the nature, purpose, and truth of this God. And the thing is, this doesn't stop or even begin with Moses. It was true of his ancestors. Abraham taking off for a new land in his old age. Jacob fleeing God in every which way only to be called by God to sire a nation. And it will be true of Moses' descendants as well, from Old Testament prophet and priest to New Testament disciple and missionary. Luce continues, I suspect that this is the way it always is, even today. To know God, you have to be close to God. You have to go with God. Faith is a full contact participation sport. One just can't sit back and expect to really know God. We have to get up off the pew, get up off the couch, and get in the game. Take a risk, try something marvelous, reach for something thought previously unachievable, step out onto the winding road of which cannot be seen, the end of which cannot be seen from our doorstep. As much as Moses complained, he also went. As much as he questioned, he also obeyed. After we have bored our friends and family with our complaints and objections, let's just do it. So here's the question to ponder. To what might God be calling you and me? What task might God have set before you and me? To what mission are you and I called? On what path has this community been set upon? It doesn't have to be spectacular. When done in faith, there is no small gesture. I realize you and I don't see ourselves as the stuff of which faith heroes are made. As we've seen today, few of the characters God employs, including Moses, are the stuff of heroes. And yet, Moses supposes he can do it. And God uses these frail, fallible, ordinary people over and over and over to do extraordinary things. In the not too distant future, our church will meet the person whom God has called and who has been discovered by our interim pastor search committee to lead and walk with us as a faith community. As we prepare to move into this interim period in the life of our church, my prayer is that we would be open to God's call in our lives as individuals and as a church and as God's children. We may feel completely unfit for the tasks we are called to do, and we probably are. But keep in mind that God includes you and me in God's plan and purposes. Keep in mind that the people who are called to lead are almost always the wrong people in human terms. Keep in mind that what is needed, the true qualities of good leadership, is faith. Faith in the promise that God is with you and God is with me.